I'm Sydney Offit, and I was 34 the day my mother decided my sister's whole life was a rumor to be managed. Cassie was 19. There was a photograph, and there was talk. And in Marlin Creek, talk travels faster than truth ever could. So my parents found a husband for her before the gossip could cool. A good family, a good name. A quiet wedding to make a loud problem disappear. My sister was too frightened to say a single word about any of it. I didn't raise my voice when it came undone. I asked one question at the engagement lunch, set a folded piece of paper on the table, and watched the whole arrangement fall apart before the plates were cleared. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where ordinary women face impossible families and answer them with steadiness instead of noise. I tell true feeling stories about the moment someone finally stops keeping the peace. If a quiet voice has ever saved someone you love, you're going to feel this one all the way down. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe, because the next part is where it really begins. I live 3 hours from where I grew up, in Charleston, in a one-bedroom apartment that is mine, and paid for, and quiet. I'm a paralegal at a family law firm. That means I spend my days inside other people's worst weeks. Custody, annulments, people who signed things they were too scared to read. I put myself through school working the overnight desk at a motor lodge, and I was the first Offit to leave Marlin Creek without being carried out. My family is proud of that the way you're proud of a scar. They mention it, then change the subject. I call home every Sunday at 6. I have done it for 11 years. Not because the calls are warm, but because somewhere in the back of my chest there's a debt I've never paid off. And her name is Cassie. She was 4 when I left for school. I told myself she'd be fine in that house. I told myself a lot of things. My mother runs that house the way a town clerk runs a courthouse, by rule and by appearance, and my father runs the feed and hardware store on Main with his own name painted gold across the window. Offits. The name is the business, and the business is the name, and both of them sit heavier on my family than anything you could weigh. So when the phone rang at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, and the screen said Mom, I sat straight up in the dark. My mother does not call late. My mother believes phone calls after 9 are for emergencies and bad character. I answered before the second ring, already cold, already certain that something in Marlin Creek had finally come loose. There's talk about your sister, my mother said. No hello. Her voice was pulled tight as fence wire. We're handling it. I asked what kind of talk, and she made a sound like she was tasting something gone off. The kind that follows a family, she said. The kind that doesn't wash out. I sat there in the dark trying to picture my sister at the center of anything loud. Cassie is the gentlest person in our bloodline. She wants to be a nurse. She cries at dog commercials. I asked again, plainly, what had happened, and my mother told me only that Cassie had been seen somewhere she shouldn't have been, at an hour that looked bad, and that people were saying things. What things? I said. It doesn't matter what's true, she said. It matters what they think they saw. I heard a cloth moving in the background, a steady wipe and squeak, and I knew without being told that she was polishing the dining table in the good front room. She only does that for important company. The whole room would smell like lemon oil, sharp enough to sting your eyes. The smell of our family putting its best face on. Mom, I said, is Cassie okay? There was a pause that lasted a beat too long. Cassie will be fine, she said. Everything will be fine, if she just does what's sensible. Sensible. In my mother's mouth that word has teeth. I told her I'd come up that weekend, and she didn't argue, which scared me more than anything she'd said. She just told me to wear something nice. We were having guests. I drove up Saturday morning with the windows down and a knot in my stomach the whole way. The road into Marlin Creek hasn't changed in 30 years. You come over the ridge and the valley opens, and there's the water tower, the steeple, the gold letters of my father's store catching the sun. It's a beautiful place, if you don't know it. Around here, a last name is a credit score and a criminal record and a marriage license all at once. People can recite 3 generations of your family's mistakes from memory. My grandmother used to say a good name was the only thing the poor could own, and she said it like a warning, not a comfort. I stopped for gas at the marathon on the edge of town, and the man behind the counter, somebody I'd known since Sunday school, looked at me a half second too long. Then he looked away. Fast. The way people do when they've been talking about your people and you've walked in mid-sentence. I paid and didn't say much. Back in the car, I sat for a minute with my hands on the wheel. Whatever the talk was, it had already grown teeth and legs. In a town like this, by the time a rumor reaches you, it's been to church twice, and supper 4 times, and nobody remembers where it started or whether it was ever true. I pulled onto Main and passed the store, and my father's truck was parked out front, which meant he'd left a Saturday's business to someone else. That alone told me how bad it was. My father does not leave the store. The store is where he keeps his dignity. I got the real story in pieces, and the real story was almost nothing. 2 weeks back, Cassie had driven her friend Becca home from a graduation party. Becca was sick drunk, crying, scared to call her own folks. So Cassie helped her up the stairs to Becca's apartment, stayed until she stopped shaking, and left a little after 2 in the morning. Someone across the lot saw a girl leaving a young man's building before dawn. The young man was Becca's brother, who'd been asleep the whole time. By the time the story reached the church parking lot, my 19-year-old sister had spent the night with a man, and by the time it reached my mother's kitchen, she was as good as ruined. That's the entire crime. A kind girl doing a kind thing in the dark. I sat at our kitchen table and felt something old and hot move through me. Because I knew this town. I knew the truth would not catch up. The truth never wears running shoes here. I told my mother what actually happened, every detail, names, and times. She listened with her arms crossed, and when I finished, she said the thing I will hear in my sleep for the rest of my life. She said it wasn't about what happened. It was about what people believed. And belief, in Marlin Creek, was the only currency that spent. I asked her what she planned to do about a lie. She wiped a spot off the counter that wasn't there. "We're going to give them a better story to tell," she said. I didn't understand yet what that meant. I would, by supper, and it would take the air out of the room. I followed her into the front room because I wanted to keep arguing, and the smell hit me first. Lemon oil, thick and bright. That polished table smell I've hated since I was small. The good room only ever came out for funerals and judgment. The long table gleamed like a held breath. My mother set down her rag and faced me, and I saw she had already decided something and was only telling me out of courtesy. "Cassie is going to get engaged," she said. I laughed because it had to be a joke. She did not laugh. "To whom?" I asked. "To a good young man from a good family," she said, as if those words were a person. I told her Cassie was 19, that she had plans, that she wanted nursing school in the fall. My mother lifted her chin. "Plans don't keep a roof over a reputation," she said. I pushed harder. I asked if anyone had asked Cassie what Cassie wanted, and my mother looked at me with a patience so cold it could frost a window, and she said it. "Her feelings don't matter, Sydney. Only what people will say." The grandfather clock in the corner ticked into the silence. I have heard a lot of cruel things said gently in my line of work. I have watched men explain why their wives didn't deserve a lawyer, but I had never heard my own mother fold my sister up that small and that calm. "It's nearly settled," she added, smoothing the tablecloth. "The Vances are coming for supper tonight." The Vances. The name landed in the room like a dropped plate. I'd grown up 2 pews behind them, and I understood all at once that supper was going to be a transaction. My father came in from the store at 5 and explained the rest the way he explains a feed order. Plainly, like there was no other reasonable way to do it. "Garrett Vance has agreed to marry your sister," he said. "His mother's seen the sense in it. A wedding settles things. People stop talking when there's a ring and a date." He poured himself coffee he wasn't going to drink. There was an election coming. Of a kind, my father up for a seat on the church board and a spot on the bank's local council. The sort of small-town honors that mean everything to a man who has spent 50 years being respectable. A scandal with the Offutt name on it would sink both. "A good marriage," he said, "tells everybody the story's over." I asked him if he hurt himself. I asked if he understood he was trading his daughter to win a vote. He didn't flinch. "I'm protecting this family," he said. And the worst part is he believed it. He believed it the way you believe a thing you were raised inside of. I asked where Cassie stood in all this, what she'd said, and both my parents went quiet, and from somewhere up the stairs I heard a door close. Soft. The way you close a door when you don't want anyone to know you've been listening. I climbed 2 steps and stopped, because I realized I had no idea what my sister wanted, and worse, I realized that neither did anyone in that kitchen. And they had stopped considering it a question worth asking. The Vances would arrive in an hour. I went up to find my sister before they did. Cassie's room still had the glow stars on the ceiling from when she was 10. She was sitting on the edge of her bed in a dress she hadn't picked, twisting a ring around her finger. The ring was already on her hand. They'd given it to her before they'd given her a choice. It was too big, a Vance heirloom sized for a different woman, and it slid loose every time she turned it, so she kept turning it, around and around, a small, frightened motion she didn't know she was making. She looked up at me and tried to smile, and the smile broke my heart in half. "Hey, Sid," she said. I sat beside her. I asked her gently if she wanted this. She looked at the carpet. "Mom says it's the only way to fix it," she said. "She says Garrett's nice. She says I'll learn to." I asked her again, slower. Not what Mom said. What she wanted. Cassie's eyes filled. "I want them to stop being ashamed of me," she whispered. "I'll just try to be a good girl about it." And there it was. That's not consent. I've sat across a conference table from 100 people who were told to smile and sign, and I know the look. It's not yes. It's surrender wearing yes's clothes. I put my hand over her turning hand and stilled it. I didn't promise to fix it. I've learned that promising to fix things is its own kind of lie, but I made myself one promise. Quietly. Sitting on that childhood bed under those plastic stars. 11 years ago, I drove out of this town and left my sister behind in this house. I was not going to drive away from her again. Downstairs, the doorbell rang. Mary Beth Vance came through our front door like she was inspecting a property she intended to buy. She was 60, silver-haired, sweet as a poisoned pie, and she ran her eyes over our good room with a small, approving nod, the way you'd grade a child's homework. Behind her came Garrett, 26, broad, already bored, a young man who'd never been told no by anyone who mattered. He shook my father's hand too hard and called my mother ma'am like he was practicing. He barely looked at Cassie, and when he did, it was the look you give a car you've already agreed to buy, checking that it hadn't been dented since the test drive. We sat. My mother had cooked for 2 days. Mary Beth complimented the china and asked Cassie nothing. The whole meal was the parents talking over the 2 people it supposedly concerned. At one point I steered it, on purpose, toward what Cassie thought of all of it, and Mary Beth set down her fork and smiled at me with her whole cold face. "This isn't about feelings, dear," she said. "It's about families." She said it like scripture. Then Garrett, helping himself to more ham, said the thing that turned my stomach. He said Cassie would settle in fine, that they all do. And he said it the way you'd say a fence would hold. Cassie stared at her plate and turned the ring. Around and around. I watched my parents nod along, grateful, relieved, like the worst day of their year was finally being solved, and I sat there in my nice clothes, in the lemon oil air, and started doing the only thing I know how to do under pressure. I started thinking like a paralegal. I've sat across from too many people who were told to be quiet, be grateful, and sign their name where the pen was pointing. If you've ever watched someone you love get talked into something they were too scared to refuse, stay with me, because what finally moved this wasn't anger. It was steadiness. Subscribe so the next quiet woman who needs to hear this can find her way to it too. After dessert, the men went to the porch and the mothers went to the kitchen, and I made myself useful clearing plates so I could listen. You learn a lot about a deal by who's relieved and who's counting. Mary Beth wasn't doing this out of Christian charity. In the kitchen, over coffee, it came out in the soft, proud way women in this town reveal their strategies. The Vances wanted the back 40, the strip of off-it land that ran along the creek behind my father's store, the parcel my father had refused to sell for 20 years. And there was more. Garrett had a problem of his own, something from the spring involving a girl 2 counties over and a check that quieted it. And his mother wanted him visibly, respectably married before it could resurface, so this wasn't a rescue, it was a swap. My sister's name to cover Garrett's, my father's land to seal it, everyone's reputation laundered through one white dress. Cassie was not the bride. Cassie was the consideration, the contract term. I stood at the sink with my hands in warm water and understood that 2 families were about to trade a frightened 19-year-old between them like a deed, and that everyone involved thought they were being responsible. That's the thing nobody tells you about how harm works in a place like this. The cruelest things get done by people absolutely certain they're doing right. I dried my hands. I had until the wedding, and I didn't yet know how short that would turn out to be. But I knew one thing for sure now. Nobody at this table was going to ask my sister what she wanted, so I was going to make the whole table answer for not asking. I tried the gentle way first. The next morning, I sat my parents down at the kitchen table, no Vances, no audience, and I made the calm case. Cassie was 19, a legal adult, and she had not freely agreed to anything. I kept my voice level. I said we could let the rumor die on its own, that lies starve without feeding, that we could send Cassie to nursing school in the fall and let her live her life. My mother folded her hands. My father looked out the window. "She'll be taken care of," he said. "The Vances are solid people." I said being taken care of and being free aren't the same thing. I said it quietly, and then I asked the question I couldn't stop asking. Did anyone ask her? Did anyone actually ask Cassie what she wants? The kitchen went still. My mother's jaw tightened. My father said, in a voice with no give in it at all, "In this house, no isn't an answer." And that was when I knew the gentle way was finished. You can't reason with people who've stopped believing the other person gets a vote. Then my mother delivered the news that turned the screw. The Vances wanted the wedding moved up. Not autumn. Not even summer. 6 weeks. "A short engagement," she said. Looks confident. "It tells the town nobody's hiding anything. 6 weeks." I felt the floor of my plan drop out from under me, because 6 weeks is nothing. 6 weeks is a held breath, and I had been quietly counting on time I no longer had. The grandfather clock in the front room chimed the half-hour through the wall, and I swear it sounded like a countdown. That night, I sat in my old bedroom with my laptop and did the math, and none of it worked. I couldn't simply take Cassie away. She was an adult. If I drove her to Charleston and she got frightened and homesick and ashamed, she'd come right back, and they'd marry her quicker out of spite. I couldn't shame my parents out of it because shame was the engine running the whole machine. I couldn't out-argue a town that didn't care what was true. Every door I tried was a wall. I listened to the grandfather clock mark the hours downstairs, that slow, patient tolling, and I thought about how somebody else's clock had been laid over my sister's whole life, and she'd been handed the ring and told to keep time to it. And then, somewhere past midnight, I stopped thinking like a daughter and started thinking like what I actually am. I work in family law. I spend my days in the machinery of how marriages are made and unmade. There was a question buried in all this that nobody in either family had bothered to look at because they were all so busy with appearances, and it was the only question that mattered. Not whether the town approved, not whether the families agreed, whether a marriage like this could even stand. I opened a blank document and typed into the search bar. Slow, the way you reach for a light switch in a dark room you half remember. Marriage, duress, West Virginia. The screen filled. And for the first time since I'd driven over that ridge, something in my chest unclenched, because I recognized the shape of what I was reading. It was a door. A real one. I just had to be sure before I opened it. In the morning, I called Ruth. Ruth is the senior attorney at my firm, 30 years in family court, and she has never once let me get sloppy with the law to make myself feel better. I told her the whole thing, plainly, and she was quiet for a moment. Then she walked me through it, careful as always. A marriage in West Virginia is a civil contract, she said. Like any contract, it requires the free consent of both people. When consent is forced out of someone, the contract is defective from the start. She was precise about the words, because the words matter. She didn't say the marriage would be automatically void. She said a marriage entered into under duress is what the law calls voidable. It stands until a court is asked to undo it, but the person who is coerced can ask the court to annul it as having never truly existed, and duress that real doesn't just expire the morning after the wedding, though how long she has to act, and what she'd have to prove, depends on the facts and how fast she moves. So, understand what that means in plain terms, Ruth said. If your sister is pressured to the altar, what the Vances are buying is a marriage she can unwind the day she's free enough to walk into a courthouse. They'd be building a house on sand and calling it stone. I sat with that. It wasn't a magic word. It wasn't a trick. It was just the truth. Lying there in the open the whole time that nobody chasing reputation had cared to pick up. The thing my whole family was treating as a permanent fix was, in fact, the most temporary thing imaginable, held together only by my sister's fear. Take the fear away. Give her one clear moment and it would have nothing left to stand on. Be careful, Sydney, Ruth added. Don't threaten, don't perform. Just tell the truth where the right people can hear it. That was exactly what I meant to do. So I drove to the county seat the next afternoon and walked into the clerk's office, the real one, with the worn marble step and the flag and the line of people getting hunting licenses and deeds notarized. I asked the woman at the window for a marriage license application. Not for me, I told her, just to look it over. She slid a blank form across the counter like it was nothing, because to her it was. I took it to one of the tall tables by the window and read it, top to bottom, the way I read everything for work. And there it was, right where it had to be. Both applicants appear in person. Both sign their own names. No proxies, no parents signing for an adult daughter. The form didn't have to spell out free will in those exact words. The marriage law standing behind it did. A license is the state asking two people, to their faces, to put their own hands to the record. And a marriage the law will hold up is one both of them actually consented to. Just two people, present, attesting in their own hand that nobody pushed them. I folded that paper into quarters and put it in my bag, and it sat there for the next 3 weeks like a small warm coal. It wasn't evidence I'd dug up in secret. It wasn't a trap. It was a public form anybody could walk in and ask for, that my whole family could have read at any time and chosen not to. That's what made it strong. Standing at that window in the afternoon light, I finally saw the shape of the thing clearly. I didn't need to fight my parents. I didn't need to outshout the town. I needed one moment, in one room, in front of the right people, where the truth got said plainly and out loud. Because the entire arrangement ran on one assumption, that nobody would ever say the quiet part where witnesses could hear it. And a room full of witnesses was exactly what an engagement lunch is for. There was one more person I needed to weigh, and that was Pastor Dale. He'd baptized me and Cassie both, and he was the one slated to perform the wedding. Dale is a kind man who has spent 40 years keeping the peace in a town that mistakes peace for silence. I went to see him at the church on a Wednesday, not to ask for help, just to plant something. We talked about the weather and the new roof fund, and then I asked him, easy as anything, how he felt about marrying my sister. He gave me the practiced answer about young love and God's plan, so I asked him a second question, softer. I asked whether he'd be comfortable standing up there if he had real reason to believe the bride was being made to do it. He didn't answer right away. He looked out the window at the cemetery where half the names are also on storefronts downtown. A pastor doesn't like to think he's part of something forced, he said, finally, slow. I didn't push. I'd learned a long time ago that you don't win a careful man by arguing. You win him by letting his own conscience finish the sentence. I just nodded and thanked him for his time. but I drove away knowing something I hadn't known walking in. Dale wasn't going to lie for my parents. If a moment came when the truth was sitting plainly on the table, he wasn't the kind of man who'd help stuff it back in a drawer. He'd been carrying a quiet discomfort about this whole thing, and I'd just given it a name. One more piece, set gently in place. The lunch was 2.5 weeks out. I went home and I waited, and I watched my sister get smaller every day. The truth from Cassie herself came on a Thursday, through a bathroom door. We were getting ready for yet another supper at the Vances, and she'd locked herself in. And when I knocked, she didn't open it. She just talked through the wood in a voice I had to lean in to hear. "I told them no, Sid," she said. "The first night. I told Mom I didn't want to." I asked what they said. "She said no isn't a word in this house," Cassie whispered. "She said I'd embarrassed everybody enough." Through the gap under the door I could see her shadow, and the small, repeated shift of her hand, and I knew she was turning that loose ring again, around and around. I pressed my palm flat against the door, on my side, as if she could feel it. I didn't tell her I had a plan. I didn't tell her about Ruth or the folded form or the pastor. She was too frightened to carry a secret that size, and a secret she let slip would end everything. Instead, I asked her one quiet question, the only one that mattered. "If somebody gave you the chance to say no out loud in front of everyone," I said, "could you do it?" The shadow under the door went still. For a long moment she didn't answer, and that silence told me everything about how deep this fear went. "I don't know," she said at last, so small it nearly wasn't there. And I understood then what my job actually was. Not to speak for her. Not to drag her out. My job was to build her a single doorway and hold it open long enough that, if she found the air, she could walk through it herself. Everything I did next was for that one door. I gave my mother one last chance, in private, the night before the lunch. I didn't argue this time. I laid it out flat and calm, the way Ruth taught me. I told her that a marriage Cassie was forced into wasn't permanent, that the law called it voidable for duress, that anyone could see Cassie wasn't a willing bride. I said it without heat. I said it as a gift, a way out, a chance to stop before the whole town watched her do this. My mother listened with her arms crossed, and when I was done she shook her head slowly like I was the one to be pitied. "You always did make things complicated," she said. "A wedding fixes this. A ring on her hand and the talk stops." I said the talk wasn't worth my sister's life, and my mother lifted her chin and gave me the line again, worn smooth from use. "Only what people will say," she said. "That's all that's ever mattered here, and you'd know it if you'd stayed." Then she warned me. She told me not to embarrass the family at the lunch tomorrow, not to make a scene, to sit there and smile and let it happen. And she had no idea, none, that in warning me about the lunch, she'd just confirmed the one thing I needed to know. That the lunch was public. That both families would be there. That the pastor would be there. And the neighbors who mattered, all of them gathered in one room as witnesses. She thought she was telling me to stay quiet. She was telling me exactly where to stand. I said goodnight. I went up to my old room and laid out my clothes for the morning and slept. Somehow, better than I had in weeks. The morning of the lunch I overheard Garrett, and whatever sympathy I might have scraped together for him died right there. He was on the side porch on his phone, and I was just inside the screen door and he didn't know I could hear. He was talking to a friend, easy and amused. He said the engagement was handled. He said his mother had sorted it. And then he said the part that turned my stomach to stone. He said Cassie was nervous, but it didn't matter. She'd come around because they always do. Like a horse. Like a balky truck. They always do. He laughed at something the friend said and added that the land alone was worth the trouble. The land. He knew about the back 40. He knew exactly what his family was getting and exactly what they were giving. And my sister wasn't even a person in that arithmetic. She was the closing cost. I stood very still on my side of the screen and let it settle into me, cold and clean. People ask me sometimes how I stay calm in the hard rooms at work, and the truth is that a certain kind of cruelty makes me calmer, not angrier. It clears everything out. When I heard Garrett Vance call my sister a thing that would come around, every last doubt I had about what I was going to do at that lunch table simply evaporated. There was nothing left to feel guilty about. I was not breaking up a love story. I was not ruining a happy day. I was stopping a sale. I went back inside, found Cassie in the hall in her pressed dress, white-faced, and I squeezed her hand once. "Whatever happens today," I told her, "you didn't do anything wrong." She almost believed me. Before we left for the church hall, I did one more thing, and it wasn't a weapon, it was a key. I took Cassie up to her room for 5 minutes while our mother fussed with the casserole dishes, and I gave her a pen and a sheet of paper, and I asked her to write down, in her own words, exactly how she felt. Not for me to wave around, not to spring on anyone, just for her. "Write what you'd say if you weren't scared," I told her. She looked at me, and then she bent over the paper and her hand shook, but she wrote. When she was done, she folded it small and held it in her fist. I told her she didn't have to show it to a single soul. I told her it was hers, that the words were real now because she'd made them, and that was the whole point. I'd watched too many people at the firm discover they had no idea what they actually wanted because no one had ever once asked them to say it plainly. My sister had spent her whole short life being told what she felt. I just wanted her to hear her own voice on paper once, before she walked into that room. "I'm not going to speak for you today," I told her at the door. "I'd never do that. I'm only going to open a door. Whether you walk through it is yours." She nodded, not understanding yet, that little folded paper clutched in her hand like a stone you'd carry for luck. Then we went downstairs and got in the cars, and drove the 4 blocks to the church hall, where 2 families and half the town were already setting out the good plates and the lemonade, waiting to celebrate a sale. Nobody was calling a sale. If this story is hitting close to home, you already know the worst part isn't the cruelty, it's how reasonable everyone sounds while they do it. Stay with me to the lunch table because what happens there is the whole reason I tell these stories. And if you believe no one should be talked past their own answer, hit subscribe right now so the next person searching for their nerve can find this. The church hall had been scrubbed and dressed within an inch of its life. Folding tables pushed into one long line, a white cloth, my mother's good china hauled in from home, and that smell again. Lemon oil, because she'd polished every surface she could reach. The whole room had the held breath shine of the front parlor, just bigger, just more public. Neighbors arrived in their Sunday clothes on a Saturday. The Hendersons, the Pruitts, old Mrs. Calloway, who has narrated this town's business from her porch for 40 years and would carry whatever happened here straight back to it. My father moved among them shaking hands, lighter than I'd seen him in years, a man watching a problem get solved in real time. My mother glowed. She'd won, in her mind. The story was about to change in front of everyone who'd been telling the bad one. I watched her accept congratulations and I understood, finally and completely, that to her this wasn't cruelty at all. This was love. The only shape of it she knew, the kind that locks the gate and calls it shelter. Cassie sat near the head of the table in her pressed dress with her hands in her lap, turning the loose ring under the tablecloth where she thought no one could see. The grandfather clock from home wasn't here, but the hall had a wall clock, plain and round, and it ticked over the murmur of the room, and every minute of it felt like a step closer to a cliff. Pastor Dale arrived and took his seat, and caught my eye across the room, and gave me a small, uncertain nod. Mary Beth Vance swept in last, in cream and pearls, and took the head of the table like a woman calling a meeting to order. It was nearly time. I had thought, the night before, about whether I had any right to do this at all. It kept me up an hour past midnight, that question, because it's the question I'm built to ask. Over-responsibility, a therapist once called it. I've spent my whole life appointing myself the keeper of other people's situations, the fixer, the one who handles it, and I know that habit can curdle into control if you don't watch it. So I made myself be honest in the dark. Was I doing this for Cassie, or to be the hero of my family's story at last? And the answer that came back was simple and clean, and let me sleep. I wasn't going to make a single choice for her. I wasn't going to announce, or accuse, or perform. I was going to do exactly one thing. I was going to put a true fact and a true question into a room, calmly, where the right people could hear them, and then I was going to be quiet and let everyone in that room decide what to do with the truth, including my sister. That's not control. That's the opposite. Control is what my parents were doing. What I was about to do was hand the room back its own conscience and step out of the way. In my bag was the folded clerk's form, soft now from being carried. In Cassie's fist was her own folded paper. 2 pieces of paper, and neither one a trap. Just the truth written down twice. I smoothed my napkin in my lap. Across the table, my father stood and tapped his water glass with a knife, and the murmur died, and every face in that bright lemon-scented room turned toward the head of the table where my sister sat too frightened to breathe. "Friends," my father said, "thank you all for coming." He was good at this, my father. Warm in front of a crowd in a way he never was at home. He talked about family, about roots, about how in hard times good people pull together. He didn't say the word rumor, and he didn't have to. Everyone in that room knew exactly what was being papered over, and that was the point. The whole performance was for them. He raised his glass to the joining of 2 fine old families, and a murmur of approval went around, glasses lifting, Mrs. Calloway nodding her approval like a judge. Then Mary Beth Vance rose, smooth as cream, and added her own few words. She thanked my parents for their good sense. She said these things were always best handled sensibly by people who understood what families owed each other. And then she said it, the line she'd said in our front room, polished now for an audience. "This isn't about feelings," she told the smiling room. "It's about families." And people nodded, because in Marlin Creek, that sounded like wisdom. My father turned to Cassie, beaming, and asked her to stand and say a few words of thanks to her future in-laws. The room turned to her, warm, expectant. Cassie pushed back her chair and rose. Her face was the color of the tablecloth. Her mouth opened, and nothing came out. The silence stretched. 3 seconds. 5. The awful, endless silence of a frightened girl who has been told her whole life that no isn't a word she's allowed. Someone coughed. My mother's smile went brittle at the edges, and under the table, where I could see and no one else could, my sister's thumb turned that loose ring around and around and around. It was time. I stood up. I did it quietly. No scrape of the chair, no drama. Just rose to my feet beside my frozen sister, and the room's attention slid from her to me, grateful for somewhere to look. The wall clock ticked. "Before anyone toasts," I said, and my voice came out exactly as calm as I'd hoped it would. "I wonder if I might ask Mrs. Vance one question." Heads turned toward Mary Beth, then back to me. My mother's eyes found mine across the table, and I watched warning flash across her face, then real fear, because she knew me, and she knew that tone, and she had no idea what I was holding. "Sydney," my father said, low, a fence post of a word. I smiled at him, pleasant, the way you smile at opposing counsel. "It's just one question, Daddy," I said. It seemed like the kind of lunch where someone ought to ask it. I let my gaze travel the table, unhurried, taking my time, because I'd learned long ago that the calmest person in a tense room is the one everyone ends up listening to. The Hendersons, the Pruitts. Mrs. Calloway, leaning forward now, scenting something better than the story she'd come with. Pastor Dale, very still, his hands folded on the white cloth. Garrett, halfway through reaching for the rolls, frozen with the basket in his hand. And Cassie, beside me, still standing, looking up at me with an expression I'll keep for the rest of my life, somewhere between terror and a wild, dawning hope. I reached into my bag, and I took out the folded clerk's form, and I did not wave it. I simply set it on the white tablecloth, in the middle of the table, where everyone could see it, and I smoothed it flat with 2 fingers. Then I looked at Mary Beth Vance. "Mrs. Vance," I said, "when Cassie and your son go down to the county clerk for their license, they'll each have to stand at that window, in person, and sign their own names. No one's parents can sign for them. No one can stand in their place. Just the two of them, putting their own hands to the record, swearing nobody made them do it. And a marriage license only holds if both people actually entered it freely. That isn't a line I'm inventing. That's the whole point of the license." The room had gone very quiet. Mary Beth's smile held, but it had stopped reaching her eyes. "I work in family law," I went on evenly. "So let me tell you the part nobody at this table has mentioned. Here in West Virginia, a marriage is a civil contract. It needs the free consent of both people, the same as any contract. And when a marriage is forced out of someone under pressure, the law calls it voidable. It stands only until the person who was forced asks a court to undo it, and that kind of pressure gives her real grounds to ask, grounds that don't just evaporate the morning after the wedding." I let that sit. I watched Mary Beth do the arithmetic behind her eyes, fast, the way a woman who has spent her life on deals does. "So here is my one question," I said. I turned, not to my parents, not to Garrett, but to Mary Beth Vance, because she was the only one at that table cold enough to understand exactly what I was telling her. "You've planned a wedding," I said. "You've planned the flowers and the date and the land that comes with it. My question is just this. Has anyone in either of these two fine old families planned for the morning Cassie walks into a courthouse, on her own, and tells a judge she was forced? Because every single person at this table just became a witness that she was." Nobody spoke. You could hear the wall clock and somebody's chair creak and, faintly, the kitchen fan. I watched it land on each of them differently. My father's face went gray, because he understood deals, and he'd just been shown that the deal he'd staked his name on was made of paper. Pastor Dale lowered his eyes to his folded hands and let out a slow breath, and I knew he was thinking about standing at the front of a church and asking 2 people if they came freely, and now being unable to unhear what I'd said. The neighbors looked at each other. Mrs. Calloway's mouth had fallen slightly open, and I could see her already rewriting the story she'd carry home, and it was no longer the story my mother had wanted told. And Mary Beth Vance. Mary Beth understood first and fastest, because she was the smartest person at that table and the least sentimental. She set down her napkin. She looked at the folded form on the white cloth, and at Cassie's white face, and at the room full of witnesses I had just so carefully named out loud, and she did the math one more time and came up with the only answer a woman like her could come up with. The land wasn't worth a marriage that could be undone on a daughter-in-law's whim, in front of a judge, with the whole county watching the Vance name dragged through an annulment. The whole point had been to quiet talk.